May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be for good pleasure before thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Please be seated. Christmas is coming, and we've been reading the story of Christmas from the Gospel of Luke. And in that story is the smaller story of a smaller miracle of a less important person, because he's just a person, John the Baptist. And it is interesting that that story of this miraculous birth to a very old woman is embedded in the story of Christmas. And part of that is because of how important John the Baptist is later during the ministry of the Lord. Now, he's important for lots of different reasons. He's important because of the historical context that John the Baptist and Jesus are. And when people saw Jesus, the Lord, preaching and telling people all these new truths, the first impression they had was that somehow John the Baptist predicted this. But Jesus' ministry and John the Baptist's ministry do not overlap. We are told that Jesus begins his ministry after John is arrested, but that John is arrested after Jesus is baptized by him. Which means there is very little gap between the two. Just a moment. So 1, 2. Now, in their age, there is between 3 and 6 months of difference. We know this because when Mary visits Elizabeth with the news that she's been told she is going to have the Christ in her womb, John the Baptist is in Elizabeth's womb and leaps at recognition that here is the presence of the Lord. So, halfway through. This story is a prophecy. We read a prophecy from John the Baptist's father. And he is talking about what John the Baptist is going to do. And a lot of what he says is a paraphrase of a lot of other prophecies from the Old Testament. He's paraphrasing many, many prophecies from Isaiah, Elijah, from the Psalms, from some of the minor prophets. So much so that if you were in the room at the time he said it, you probably could have recognized a lot of what he said. Also because he is from an educated family. He himself serves in the temple. That's what his job is. This is an educated man, probably very well respected in his culture, because he's older and he's been serving all his life. And now they're there to celebrate the birth of his son after so many years of hardship with his wife. And they all know how old she is. They all know them intimately. They would have been amazed at the miraculousness as well. So when he speaks a prophecy, they listen. It's interesting, or maybe a wonderment, to think, what happened to those people over the next 30 years? Or perhaps over the next 25 to 28 years? Before John the Baptist came out of the wilderness, before Jesus began his ministry. Knowing that they heard this prophecy. Knowing that this boy, who they know, is going to grow up to do these things. And that he is going to foretell the coming of the Christ. It's an amazing thought, isn't it? we tend to think of some of the first people to know about the birth of the Lord. Mary, obviously, and Joseph. Later, the shepherds. And that the shepherds went and told all these people, which we'll get to next week. But here, even before the Lord is born, a group of people are told it's happening now. What you've been waiting for hundreds of years, 700 years, what Abraham was promised perhaps 2,000 years ago, is happening now. It would be astounding for those people. It's happening now. Something they've been waiting for and waiting for. We also read from Divine Providence about the difference between temporal things and eternal things. Temporal means things of time. It generally means things that are finite, or at least indefinite. Things that have a beginning, and usually an end. Things that have limits. Now, we are used to thinking of space. Space is easy to see as limited. We can see that this object is a finite object with boundaries that we can measure. And here is this object, and here is not this object. It's how we can tell that it's finite. The same is true, though, of time. Time is also limited from our perspective. Things have a beginning, and things have an end. And this is something that is easy for us to tell rationally. So much so that some of you may be thinking, why is he harping on this? Because while it's easy to tell rationally, it's not as easy to accept emotionally. It's pretty easy emotionally to accept that the cake is finite, that it's only so big. But if you've ever seen a child finish a slice of birthday cake and then ask for more, it's hard sometimes to admit that it's going to end. The same is true with life. We know that natural life is limited, that it ends. We have a hard time accepting that. A lot of things in life, in the natural world, end. In fact, from our reading, and you can confirm this through observation, everything in the natural world ends. Everything dies. Everything falls apart. It's the way the natural world is. It's fashionable for some to misinterpret aspect of physics, and that is that time is relative, and that maybe it's this thing that you can bend or something. I don't know what that means, but it's relative. One of the things that that's saying, that time is relative, is that time is not itself a thing, but rather it tells you about the condition of a thing. That's what makes it a relative concept. Just like black is not a thing, it tells you about the condition of a thing, that it's this particular pigmentation, that it reflects this much light or not. Time is similar. Time is the concept we use to describe an aspect of a thing. And the way that physicists and chemists and scientists measure time is in decay. Decay is how they measure time. If you were to show them a very old rock, and they wanted to know how old is this rock, they would measure how much decay has occurred to this rock. No other scientific measurement is very accurate for them. All time is measured according to decay. It's kind of astonishing. Once you move into the world of biology, then they like to pretend that things don't decay. They like to pretend, oh, see, that organism got bigger. And then later it started to decay. But the only way a baby gets older and bigger is if its cells decay. And, amazingly enough, even the genetic code of a baby begins to decay. You ever wondered why cancer is so common in the elderly? Because there is decay. There is a falling apart of the cells to replicate appropriately. And sometimes they go out of whack and cancer occurs. Decay. Now those are just scientific confirmations of a more important principle. That natural time is a measurement of things coming to an end. That's what temporal means. Temporal means the measurement of things that come to an end. So if you're wondering about anything in particular, whether it's a church, a presidential administration, a car, a meal, Christmas season, anything, your natural life, the hard truth is that they end. They all do. When? We don't know. Sometimes we do, but usually we do not. Things end. Things die. It's really hard. That's temporal. Eternal is something that does not end. Something that may have a beginning, but has no end. That's the limit when it comes to time that matters most to us. Not does it have a beginning, but does it have an end? Outside of the Lord, everything, including spiritual things, has a beginning. You have a beginning. You, even your soul, does not go back in time to eternity. The Lord that flows into you does forever and ever and ever with no limit. And a concept that we can't even begin to really understand. But you have a beginning. It's your birth date, maybe a little bit earlier. You have a beginning. The Lord looks at these things. And inasmuch as these natural things have spirit or are spiritual, they do not have an end. They continue to eternity. Your soul, you, the real you, not your body, not these cells that get cancer, you, your soul, your loves, the core of who you truly are, does not end. It is not limited. It does not die. It continues to eternity. This is one of the more comforting teachings about religion, or from religion. That life is both temporal, it ends, but also that there's a part of it that's eternal, that does not end. One easy way of seeing this is by comparing that temporal finishing, or limitedness, to spatial limitedness. You, me, all of us, we're limited by our body. And we can measure our body. We can get out little calipers and say, oh, look, it's that big. We can count even cells in our body and do some calculations and figure out what is the number of atoms in me. Silly things like that. We can look at our brain and measure it in all sorts of peculiar ways. We're not very good at that right now. But even if we were theoretically, scientifically perfect at it, if we could measure every little natural, finite thing about ourselves, we still wouldn't be able to say, where is the soul? Who is this person? Why is it that this person who's alive today is the same person from 3 weeks ago or from 40 years ago, especially considering 40 years ago and today, they're literally different atoms. Everything's different about them, except yet they're the same, and yet they've changed. It's this mystery of science. Yet poetically, remember that, poetically, artistically, just from a vibe, yeah, it makes sense. That person's different, they've changed. And yet, they're the same. We feel that. We can feel poetically how someone is both different and the same. We have a feeling for it. What is that thing? It seems immeasurable from a scientific standpoint because it is. That thing, whatever that person is, that essence of them, their soul, is not limited naturally from a physical boundary standpoint. What's more, we notice that people have an influence on us, and that we have an influence on others. We may even gain this perspective, especially when thinking about those who have died, and how they still have an influence on us. How their life, and their loves, and what they did lives beyond just their physical manifestation. And so we can see that there's something more than natural about a person, if we let ourselves. And so that thing that is not bound by space cannot also therefore be bound by time. Because remember, time is itself a relative thing that measures just natural decay. And if that spiritual thing, that is a person, isn't composed or limited by these atomic principles, these things of natural science, then it's not decaying, but growing, evolving, changing. Always. A person when they're 88 has grown, not decayed, from when they were 87. That's a remarkable truth. That every year, that spirit grows. That there is more there. Even for those poor people who are choosing evil, they're becoming more that. And as we choose good, we are becoming more good. That is what continues to eternity. That's what is eternal. The love in us. The people at the time, when they heard the prophecy of Zechariah, they were thinking temporally. Because they're very natural people, just like we are. And they're thinking about, okay, so when is this going to happen? We've been waiting. Like, they could actually get out a calendar and start counting days for how many days they've been waiting. They could count the years. They could add the centuries together. They can do the math. They've been waiting for this moment. And just as they believe that what the Lord is going to do is a finite thing, perhaps destroy Rome, liberate Judah, reestablish proper temple worship, things like that. A very natural, limited thing. They're also thinking from a very natural, limited perspective from time. That until this moment, we are oppressed by our enemies. And they're making a mistake. A very important teaching that we need to remember in the context of Christmas is that inasmuch as people are alive, they have spiritual freedom. The Lord came on earth because that freedom was at risk of being shut off. But it was never entirely closed. The people at this time, or even just don't think about this time, 100 years before that, were in spiritual freedom to become better or worse people. They could say to themselves, well, one day the Messiah will come and he'll fix everything, so I don't have to worry about it. And some people thought that. Some people think that today. One day the Messiah will come, the second coming, or however they say it, and he'll fix everything, so throwing my hands up. I'll get ready for that. That's what I'm going to wait for. But one day. Now is that day. Every day. John the Baptist has a poetic sense, a correspondential sense, as we read in the Heavenly Doctrine. He represents that message from the Word that is saying, repent for the remission of sins. You can put away the evil now and be prepared to receive the good. When? Now. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait till later. You can, but you don't have to. Christmas is coming. And from a natural sense, Christmas 2020 will end. But you don't have to wait for Christmas. You don't have to wait for December 25th to celebrate Christmas. You could do it today. That's what's so wonderful about it being a Christmas season. We get that opportunity again and again and again. But on December 26th, it's not time to prepare for the next year's Christmas. It's just time to celebrate Christmas again. Every day. You really can. Because every day is an opportunity to welcome the Lord into your life. To say, I am going to look beyond what is merely temporal. I'm not going to look for rewards and riches and success here on earth. But I'm going to look towards something that is eternal. I'm going to remember that the love that is from the Lord flowing into me can flow out from me. That if I live according to His truth, I can do good, and that good can last to eternity. That's the divine blessing that the Lord promises each of us. And that's something that we can embrace now and every day. We do not need wait. So, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy. Amen. Please rise for an inscription to the Lord. Now to the one God of heaven and earth be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen.